Hello, everybody. Here is Michael from New Left. And today, again, we will be talking about European unions. And I'm lucky I found Ben Egan, who is the lead organizer in Uni. So, Ben, can you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do, how you ended up where you are on this comfy chair of yours, or maybe
Sure.
not that comfy. Maybe it's a hot chair. Who knows? We will find out.
Well, given the current heat wave, I can guarantee you it's hot, and as we just established, I don't have aircon. Yeah, so I'm Ben Egan, organising director for Uni Europa. Uni Europa is the private services federation for European level, which is part of Uni Global, which is obviously the same at the global level. Do you want me to just briefly explain what Uni does? Yeah.
Whatever you feel like, please
Yeah,
do, because not everyone has seen the previous interviews. So
Okay, so basically you have, of course, you have all of the unions in every country and the confederation, the union centers. And then at the international level, so at the European level, you have the ETUC, which is confederation, which kind of it's the official social partner at European level, and represents all workers effectively. But then you also have 10 union federations representing specific sectors. So for us, we're one of those 10, one of the bigger ones, representing private services. So that would be our biggest sectors would be commerce, retail workers, ICTS workers, finance, post, logistics, and then you've got graphical, media, care, public services. I'm sure I will have missed one or two out, so I apologize for that. But you get the idea of the kind of sectors. The work I do is I'm based in the Brussels office, and I'm responsible for the organizing work that we do with our affiliates in the various countries. So that's mostly working around sectoral collective bargaining is our main kind of calling card. So lots of unions that already have that sectoral bargaining. So that would be generally Northern and Western and into Southwestern Europe. Then we work with them to try to basically make it more inclusive, more participatory, use it to engage more members, etc., etc. And the places where we don't have it, we try and work with unions to put together a plan to achieve it, which basically means, having a kind of a systematic approach to try and get to applying pressure so that you can have it. Because, I mean, usually where we don't have sectoral bargaining, it's either they've never had it, or there was obviously that period with the Troika and so on some years ago where it was dismantled. So depending on which approach, where you start that journey from, it can require different levels of engagement. But we work with unions basically to build their power.
Okay. So let's jump into the deep water with a tough question. So how you see the unionization in Europe? You are in the eye of the hurricane, one can say. So there isn't a better person to talk about it because you are running or co-running, or how to put it, the biggest union in Europe. So when I say Europe, I mean European Union. Yeah, what is outside of European Union is kind of, we don't have much influence about that, but
no,
so let's talk about
just to be clear, I'm not running. I do just the organizing work. We have an elected leadership.
But organizing
on the organizing bit,
that's the core of the
on the organizing bit. Look, I mean, I let's not beat around the bush. It's dire. Things are very, very bad. The membership. Actually, if you look at the membership trends over quite an extended period, and of course, the kind of neoliberal attacks to try and break down both unions as organizations, but crucially the sector, the collective bargaining that underpins their power, is obviously at different stages of development. Obviously, you can hear from my accent where I'm from the UK, which is, in many cases in Europe, that was the
that's where it all started with Thatcher.
It's patient zero. So we've got kind of 40 plus years now of experience of this, but then you go all around Europe, and then of course in Central and Eastern Europe, around 25 years ago, certainly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc., you had this kind of shock therapy approach where it was applied willingly there, but then even places where you thought were kind of immune to it, so think of Western Europe, like France, Belgium, even your Nordic countries, etc. they are under, you know, a sustained period of attack in terms of their trade union rights as well. So, I mean, everywhere you look in Europe, you're really grasping for good news stories. It's a very difficult
There is
terrain.
one exception, Iceland. They withstand it. No?
There's more than one exception. If you got individual unions, I mean, hopefully we can discuss them here. But there's lots of unions doing really good stuff, but systematically.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the whole countries, not only Iceland. For
So
whatever
Iceland
reason, managed to kind of.
yeah. So I can tell you a bit about Iceland because I work with several Icelandic unions, and that system that they have, what they have at the moment is effectively a national closed shop. Yeah, so on day one of employment in Iceland, if you join the company, on day one, your employer's responsibility is to allocate you to the union, which is why they have effectively 100% membership. But even in Iceland with that system, it's starting to kind of creak at the edges because firstly, I've had reports that lots of companies, it doesn't say which union they have to put them in. So increasingly, you're seeing them put them in either in-house yellow unions or the inappropriate one, from outside.
Okay, so even Iceland isn't such a great example. Okay.
There's good examples all over the place, and there's bad examples all over the place.
No, yeah, but talking holistically about countries.
Exactly. So what you have in Iceland, the problem that you would have, and this is not a specifically issue of Iceland, this is a general observation, is that generally there's a kind of between membership and action, there's often a trade-off between those two. Yeah. So if you have a situation where you have very, very high membership, high density, and in this case, I mean, this is obviously the perfect example. It's 100%. I know there's some carve out, so it ends up, I think the official rate is like 94 or something, but it's effectively everybody is in the union.
When you are self-employed, it's kind of hard to run a union on you, yeah?
Yeah, of course. But sometimes when you have that kind of high levels of density, actually the trade-off sometimes can be that it's very difficult to activate workers to actually do anything because they think, well, unions are really strong here. Everyone's in the union. The union, i.e. somebody else or an official of the union, will sort out all my problems because the union's strong. Whereas sometimes when you have places where the union is not so strong, but you've got, and you'll know this yourself from your own union experience, but you've got a hardcore group of people who are just not having it, who are going to build and are going to try to organize their workplaces. Sometimes that can be more powerful than having 100% of people who don't want to take any action. So there's always this kind of a trade-off between the two. But to go back to your original question about how things are in general things are bad. Membership is not necessarily down everywhere, but there's something that concerns me much more, something that much more of my working day and working life is dedicated to, and that's the hollowing out of workplace leader structures everywhere. So if you look at unions where, and just to go back to the Nordics again, if you look at places like that, which even despite some of the challenges we've had with far-right governments and so on in some of those countries recently, and the kind of systematic attacks we've had on some of the unions, I mean, they're still some of the strongest trade unions in the world, so we shouldn't lose sight of that. But also, even there, before you see a decline in membership, it's usually preceded, and this can be 5, 10, 15 years before that, by a gradual decline in your level of what we call shop stewards or works councils, workplace leaders, call them what you want. The terminology is different, delegates, whatever. The phraseology is different in lots of different countries in Europe, but effectively what we're talking about is the same thing, which is the shop steward as the representative of the trade union on the shop floor, not the official, not the people in the head office, not the lawyers, but the shop steward on the day where worker joins the workplace, and on day one, shop steward approaches everybody who starts.
What do you ascribe it to? That they kind of lead on? Sounds like they are not leaving, but they are not as engaged as they used to in the past, and then it crumbles. Yeah. So what is your theory? Why is it happening?
It's various reasons. I think the biggest one, which obviously is a little bit of a cop-out because it's the most difficult one to overcome, certainly in the short term, is culture. I mean, the union culture in most unions has developed into such a way that, let's say, for example, I'm a full-time union organizer, union leader, official, call it what you want. whatever my role is. And I go, okay, in this company, I've got all of these companies that I'm responsible for with, varying levels of membership. Maybe my strongest workplace has got 60% membership, and maybe I've got somewhere we only have 2-3 members out of the workplace. And what I want from each of, of course, the objective of any union is that I want to have workplace reps or shop stewards or whatever terminology. Does shop stewards make sense to you, by the way? Because then I could just say one and I don't have to keep saying them all each time. Okay,
No.
shop
You
steward is
explained it, so
understood. Yeah.
let's stuck with it.
So let's say I need a shop steward in each of my workplaces, and I've been struggling for years to get them, and it's really difficult. Now, the correct approach, the proper organizing approach to building strong unions is to basically map workplaces, find out, I'll paraphrase very, very quickly, find out the things that piss them off at work and find out the people that they look to as leaders. Find that and that's how you build campaigns. But actually, to go and do that sometimes takes a bit of time. It takes resources that a lot of unions have simply not allocated. So effectively what you end up doing is you end up going, will anybody please be the shop steward? And one person goes, well, all right then, but I'm not I'll open the mail, I'll put up the posters or whatever, but I'm not doing any more than that. You go, oh, thanks, you're now my shop steward. And you do that again and again and again and again. And effectively what you end up with is, yes, you can now say you've got shop stewards, but so many of them are not trained. So many of them have not been brought in the right sense, which is that we condition so many of our shop stewards that the job of a shop steward, even if it's one who's more active, is that now that you are the union representative, your job is to wait for members to bring their problems to you. And then your job is to fix those problems. When actually we should be conditioning shop stewards everywhere that your number one priority is to make sure your workplace union is as strong as possible. And all of those problems that come, we will fix as a consequence of having a stronger trade union. So what you'll find is that in lots of places, like I said, even where we've got relatively strong trade unions in Northern Western Europe, especially, you see a hollowing out of those. So it may very well be, of course, the ultimate test of it is that there aren't any. Or you have many, many vacancies, or, only 40% of your actual shop steward positions that you are allowed to have actually got anybody there. And then look at your 40%. What's the profile there? Well, the average shop steward is a 63-year-old man. It's how many of them have been on training? Maybe half of them have done some training. So there's a huge challenge there, and there's a huge job to be done by trade unions across Europe to absolutely refocus all of their attention on making sure that they have strong workplace unions. And this, of course, is where the trade-off or the balance comes with the sectoral collective bargaining. Because an inconvenient truth of this, of course, is that very often the unions which are stronger traditionally will have sectoral collective bargaining. And very often what happens over a period of time, if you're not very careful, it's almost inevitable, is that the worker or the member who maybe doesn't have a shop steward, who maybe is not particularly active in certain, in trade union politics, just is not properly engaged in the process of collective bargaining. So effectively something that happens up there in the capital city between senior union people, and at the end I find out what pay rise I got, and probably every time I say it should have been more. And there's this, I know people always say it's a service culture that's been created, and it's true. It was, we treat members as if they're customers, and then wonder why they treat us like some private service provider. And then also we condition the activists and the leaders that we do have in the shop floor that your job is just to fix problems, and it shouldn't be. It should be about.
So what is your theory? Why did the culture evolve the way how you are describing? Because obviously this isn't the way it has to be.
No.
Culture is very flexible. We can do whatever we want with it up to a point, obviously. But how come that this is the place we are in?
I to be honest, I think it's just I think it's quite inevitable. I think it's.
I wouldn't call it inevitable. I would call it just it evolved this way because it evolved this way. It's not inevitable.
When I say inevitable, I mean in terms of the internal. So I think if you want to track that process, there's two ways of looking at it. One of which I think is more interesting for us. One is the external, yeah. So because of these, neoliberal governments, Actually, with how far right everything's gone now, you kind of look back to neoliberal governments with like misty-eyed, the good old days.
Adults in the room.
Exactly. Exactly. It was just
Not the
people.
complete crazies.
Yeah,
You don't even know what to say because it's just wow.
It wasn't psychotic liars. It was just people like Mandelson. So yeah, so effectively, you got the external stuff. So you obviously it's the government, it's the politics, etc. But then also it's the stuff that's happening in the workplaces. It's the growth of multinational companies, and you'll know much better than I do about this. The multinational companies who all flooded into Central Eastern Europe from the 90s onwards. They went there for a specific reason, which we all know that is. So it's the companies as well, and then it's also
it wasn't all embracing love. I'm surprised, Ben. It wasn't that.
I wouldn't presume to be able to comment on this when talking to you, so you know much better than I do. But then it's also the change of work as well, in the sense of automation of jobs, hollowing out of like kind of the middle of the labor market or whatever, flattening of basically shit jobs. And then of course now it's AI is the new boogeyman or whatever. So all of that external stuff, absolutely true. It's absolutely fundamental stuff. But we don't control any of it. What's more interesting to me is internal union culture, structure, practice, in which you can basically acknowledge all of those existential threats and then say, okay, given that they are all true, what is our plan to adjust? And actually, most unions, well, I would go even more than most, I'd say virtually all, are quite conservative in terms of their bureaucracy. I'm not talking about the political output here, or of course, although some are conservative in that way as well. But I'm talking about the structures of unions, and it's quite difficult. And trust me, I know this, and I have the scars from trying to do so, to try to get a union to change the way that it conducts its business, let's say, can be very, very difficult. Of course, most unions have pretty good democratic structures, so there's a whole political level of a debate. Then you have to go to a Congress. This can take 2 or 3 years. Then you agree you're going to do something differently. Then there's the practice of actually getting people to do things differently to what they've done for a long time. So it can be a really, well, not can be, it usually is a very kind of difficult process. So when I talked about it being inevitable, what I meant there was, I think, and there's plenty of people who've theorized about the kind of iron laws of bureaucracy and so on, that if you go back to the history of any trade union, I mean, how does it start? It usually starts something roughly along the lines of some workers in a workplace have got a problem, got some issue. If you go back, certainly where I'm from, the UK and in North and Western Europe, it would very often be around the health and safety or pay. One of those two things usually. And we're going back 150 plus years here. And he say, look, okay, we're not going to be picked off one by one. We're going to say, okay, either we all get this or none of us are going to work. That's the effective. That's the kernel. That's the genesis of collective bargaining and of trade unions. That's how it starts. But then what happens is, okay, oh, that works. Okay, now we're going to stick together on this new issue. And then, do you know what? I'm going to go and tell the guys in the other shop, and then we're going to go to the next place. And that's basically how unions formed. And then at some point along that journey, you start to say, okay, well, we've got enough members now. I think we need some people who can actually run the union across all the different workplaces on our behalf. So maybe we need to employ some staff to do that. So either employ staff, or we need to elect some from amongst us who will then come out of work full time and run the union. So they're the two models really in Europe. But either way, what eventually happens is you get further away from the workplace. You then become your own employer. You become your own bureaucracy with forms to fill and processes to follow and HR policies and so on. And when I talked about the inevitability, I just think that once you become a bureaucracy,
so you meant the setup and the structure?
Yeah, I think the professionalization. Okay. Yeah, I think inevitably takes you away from that core roots thing, and then you have this them and us culture, which can develop within unions, where the workers or even the shop stewards, so even your representatives within the companies, can point to the union staff in the head office and say, "You're the union, we're just members." Do you know what I mean? So who is the union here? Of course, my position is always the members are the union. And one thing that, with all of the workshops that I run with full-timers and so on, I always impress this upon them, that the members are the union. the shop stewards are the leaders of the union. You, if you work for the union, you're an employee of the union. You're not the union. You are this, you see yourself as privileged civil servants whose job it is to go out and help those workers build their trade union power. But very often, the culture in lots of unions is much more the other way around, and I think that's a problem because when you get to the point where the union is externalized, and I'm sure you will have seen this in your experience, particularly with more sophisticated anti-union strategies that we see from multinationals and so on, it's very easy to kind of other the union and say the union is this thing that's outside trying to get into our company, where you say, no, this is something that grew inside your company, and we are helping them to grow in that way. And I know this only sounds like semantics, but these are the building stones for me of building a good strategy, is making sure that we use the right labels and that we know exactly what it is that we're trying to build. And I think that's I think that if you look at places, particularly where you have a big, and I gave you an example there, which would be a low level. I mean, we've got a few staff. I mean, we now have lots of unions in Europe with hundreds and in some cases thousands of staff, and a collective bargaining which is done in closed doors. And
3,000 employees, something like that, when I'm not mistaken.
I don't know, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. So yeah, you have these big unions, and then when I talk about the inevitability, I think that once it's a double-edged sword. So sectoral collective bargaining is a double-edged sword in the sense that if you don't build all those building blocks and you don't have good communication two-way between every level of the union, it can become abstract, it can become distant, it can become very difficult to mobilize any workers to actually take action to either defend or support or to boost the demands. But on the other side, so on the one hand, I mean, I even have had some conversations with unions many times actually over the years who say that they don't want sectoral bargaining for those reasons. Like, we prefer company, and we might even coordinate company by company and make the same demands, but we want company bargaining because then that makes the workers understand that they need to be involved in this process and so on. And I understand why they're saying that, but I do disagree, because notwithstanding those challenges, actually sectoral collective bargaining is the greatest tool that the working class movement ever had for improving people's paying conditions, particularly at the lower levels of the workforce. So our job is to build that bridge between those two levels and to make sure that, I mean, I use this kind of example a lot, but right now, too often, collective bargaining, especially sectoral collective bargaining and organizing, are considered to be two entirely independent functions. Because what's collective bargaining? Collective bargaining is the proper core union business. It's negotiations. It's going head to head with employers and coming up with agreements. And what's organizing? Organizing is going out getting new members. And you go like, okay, well, firstly, that's not what organizing is, number one. And secondly, like, if you have a proper, I mean, when we do strategy sessions with unions, we actually try to get them to come up with a organizing and collective bargaining strategy. That the two things have to be together. They're two sides of the same coin. And that if I look at the unions who are doing the best work, the most effective work, and delivering the best, particularly in sectoral level, it's the ones where actually organizing campaigns can be driven by negotiators, i.e., let's say Michael, you're going to go into your collective bargaining negotiations, and maybe what you used to do in the past was you'd go, trying to negotiate as hard as you could. Then you come out with whatever you come out with, and then maybe you're not happy. So then maybe you'll say, "Oh, can we do some action to show that we're not happy on it?" Right? And that wasn't really working. So you learn from that, and let's say next time round, you come to either the organizers, if you have full-time organizers, or to the shop stewards or whatever, and say, "Listen, guys, I don't want that to happen again. We have got negotiations opening 6 months from now, 8 months from now, a year from now, whatever. Well, let's put together a 6, 8, 12-month, whatever it is, escalation campaign of constantly building and building and building, so that when we go into those negotiations, we're riding the wave. There's, they can hear the crowds outside the negotiation, and they know exactly what the demands are, and they know what will happen if those demands are not met, etc., etc. So those two things have to go together, and we do have lots of examples of unions that are doing that, but it's not something, if we're honest, that comes naturally to a lot of unions. It's a real slog of having to push and push and push.
This leads to another question, because sounds like you're describing the elephant in the room, which is education. That people are not really aware what is at stake, what's going on, where it all came from. You know, the whole culture, as you were
Yeah, yeah,
saying, just
yeah.
is very blurry for most people. And then they think that this is the best of possible worlds, when
Yeah.
in reality, well,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
look at the history, what was going on 50 years ago in most Western countries, and well, yeah, and say something about that. So, because this is, I mean, I'm not swimming in those unions water for decades like you do. So I'm in only for like 2 or 3 years, and this is totally something that I lack. That
Yeah,
the
yeah.
educational part is non-existent in many cases, or if something's there, then it's very
Yeah.
hollowed out and simple, and it's not like a university of unions or what. Huh?
Yeah, I agree.
So, and I have the feeling that in the past it wasn't that way, that something got lost. Because when
Yeah.
I'm reading and listening about 19th century and worker movements back then, that those guys back then understood that it starts here. Huh?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And
So
also
what
what
happened there? Huh?
yeah, so but also what are unions for? You know, like so if you look at the historically, very often the union, you know, is the union a vehicle for socialist politics, or is it the other way around? Because actually, I think lots of unions have ended up in the other way around, which is if we do say anything political, it's to preach to the choir so that nice left wingers will join the union, rather than being the other way around, which is that we should be developing people who are critical of capitalism, who understand about
It doesn't have
the,
to be
the
critical of
challenges.
capitalism, just simple
Whatever,
data like
critical,
inflation
full
is
stop.
here. Yeah, like let's be critical of reality. When the inflation goes up, my salary should kind of mirror the movement. It's not rocket science, because if it doesn't, then I will be poorer. So when you are doing the profits you are doing, then please share it with me, because this is my money.
Precisely. So this is one of the challenges when we talk about
And this is not
education.
rocket science. That's why I'm so surprised that really sounds like most people don't understand the simple mathematics, that everything that we have came from labor. It just didn't fall from the sky. So it's our labor that made it all happen. So yeah, let's share it. Yeah. And maybe the scissors shouldn't be opening, but they should be kind of closing. But you know, as selling points go, it isn't exactly complicated sell. I was in sales for over a decade, so it's kind of easy to explain to child that
Yeah, but I
when you
don't.
bake the pizza is yours. So why should you hand off 2/3 of the pizza to someone else who wasn't even baking it, no, in the first place?
For the same reason that
The
I said before.
shareholder.
Yeah, for the same reason that I said before, is this this um this mentality and this culture of bureaucracy and of serving the status quo effectively. So look, when we talk about education, there's two main things that I think you can say which have fed into the problem or the challenges that we have now. One of them is political education. Yeah, so if you look at like historically, because you can't separate the fact that you see so many countries in Europe now where the far right has grown hugely, and it's come from people whose material interests are diametrically opposed, come from working class, white working class or whatever, which is something that, just take my own country. I mean, until 2019, I mean, there was always, there's racists in every village or whatever, but in terms of being a political movement, I mean, we had this concept of the red wall, which was that there's a certain part that when you get to the north of England, which will always be Labour forever, no matter how no matter how neoliberal and how many illegal wars Labour takes us into, they will always vote red, and therefore we're taken for granted for a long time. But then what happened was in 2019, in the fallout of the Brexit stuff, and then having a celebrity prime minister in Boris Johnson, for the first time ever, loads of those places voted blue, and it seems like that was that was crossing the Rubicon, let's say, because now they're all back in Reform, far right party in Britain. So when you consider why is that, I think a sizable part of the answer to that question is, of course, a big part of it is why vote for this Labour Party, because they're crap. They're not doing anything for workers, and I understand that. But also at the same time, there is a complete absence of political education from trade unions. And if I look at, and I'm sure this will be replicated across lots of countries, and I know that from the unions that I work with, which is that many unions these days would see it as it's not their role to educate their members or their activists in terms of politics.
No, and that's exactly the question. Where did this whole part of being a trade union kind of get lost? Because it wasn't like that in the past. So somewhere along the way, it just, and
I think
the question is whether you know where it happened and what were the causes that it was dropped. Because in my mind, the education comes first and everything else is secondary, because first you have to know that you have problems. When you are blind to your own problems because someone tells you a fairy tale and you believe that fairy tale, then suddenly, you know, you don't feel the need to unionize because everything is peachy. Huh?
I think there's several factors, and it does differ slightly the way it rolls out in each country. I know in my own country, it's the factors really are. I mean, one of them is that the unions that were historically the most political have been absolutely, you know, decimated. So I mean, the classic one is the miners, which was, you know, historically the strongest union in Britain. I think at its peak it had like 250,000 members or something, and now I don't
was before the Second World War or after? Or,
no. The big fight with Thatcher, that was the big totemic fight.
That was the peak of the membership as well?
No, it wasn't the peak.
No, I meant the membership. I know when the fight happened, but when was the peak?
Yeah, the membership peak would have was much earlier. Yeah, maybe in the early 50s or something, maybe just after.
Okay. So after the Second World War, when Labour was kind of, you know, flying. Okay.
Well, it's switched between. To be honest, because it's a paradigm shift, it kind of doesn't matter. Like now, it doesn't matter if Labour are in power because they're not going to touch the actual mechanics of how neoliberalism works. Actually, it's the same if you go back to the late 40s, early 50s, even into the 60s. Actually, it's the same, but the other way, which was a social democracy with strong trade unions and good good living conditions. I mean, whether the government was red or blue didn't really make a difference because everybody bought into the paradigm, and we now have the same kind of phenomenon, but obviously with the wrong with the wrong outlook.
No, wrong is relative. For the elites, for the top 1 to 3 percentage points is a fairy tale.
It's always
it's wonderful, huh?
Of
so and this is exactly the thing, to explain to people that this is not really in your self-interest, and don't buy into this shit because this is bullshit. This is fairy tale. They are selling you snake oil.
So I think there's a part for that, but then I think there's also, like, unless you've got an alternative to offer, that's a not such a strong argument to make. Like I said, in the UK, many of the unions, certainly the biggest unions, they were affiliated to the Labour Party. The Labour Party was formed by the unions to go and represent us in the workplace. And actually, I mean, I know myself from when I used to be an organiser in the UK. I was an organiser for a union that actually wasn't affiliated to the Labour Party, but it was something that would come up pretty much on a daily basis when you're talking to workers. Oh, why do I want to give my money to the Labour Party or whatever? So the fact that the Labour Party became nothing that you can support did create a real kind of tension between what should the political education be, because historically the political education was to understand effectively, I mean, maybe Marxist is too strong, but to understand how capitalism works and understand that there's a workers' party that you need to support and be active in. But once that thing to point out wasn't there, what does a political education look like? And one of the things that's happened, and we have to be honest about this as well, is that actually the move towards the organizing model of trade unionism, actually in many cases I found depoliticized further, because actually when you talk about organizing, workplace organizing, you actually say, let's for the time being not talk about the big existential issues. And let's not talk about the big political issues. Let's talk about the thing that's annoying you in your workplace today. Let's keep it at that level. Yeah. And people, okay. And that is the most effective way for trying to engage new groups of workers who are not active, who are not, ready to go on strike, or not ready, not angry about the state of the world, maybe confused a bit or whatever. These low-level workplace issues are the best way to do it. But it's where you start. And unfortunately, I've seen it myself with lots of unions, it becomes where they start, but also where they finish. And then a union just becomes this kind of,
but again, why is it so hollowed out? Because the problems are not going smaller and smaller and smaller. They are bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is really an elephant in the room. And I don't understand, the situation is screaming, let's do something differently. Huh?
But
is it denial or what is it in your
No. So basically, if you want to take a group of workers who have not got any history of doing anything political, active, being organized in any way, to get them active on a big issue, which requires big, to change big things requires big action. Those workers are not ready. They've not been conditioned. They've not been trained. They've not been developed. They've not got any consciousness. Actually, the way that you do it is through systematically, slowly finding small issues and gradually building up the confidence. And you get that through, you can't tell people about working class solidarity. They have to experience it. And they experience it through gradually doing collective actions with their colleagues. And that can, and I've seen it myself many times, that can completely transform someone's political outlook. Because what's happening right now is that people are, let's say there's this big move towards the far right. Everybody support, a big increase in support for the far right. And it's true, of course. But it's also, in my opinion, shallow. It's widespread, but shallow. Because it's people following shit on comment sections and on social media or whatever. It's not actually built on solid organizing principles where people are discussing it in person every day and they've got their strong opinions or whatever. But the problem is the choice then of the left or of the trade union movement, especially because we're still the biggest part of in terms of people, is do you want to fight them on the social media and we can fight their shallow with our shallow, or do we want to actually build grassroots local organization where people are immune to this kind of arguing? And unfortunately, very often you do the former because it's quicker and easier, and you just employ a few people and they put a lot of stuff on social media. Whereas I would say we need the latter, which is that really through getting people active in their workplaces is what will make them conscious to go beyond their workplace. But the problem that you have as well is that lots of unions have now got into the situation where even if they're doing organizing, it's kind of a hamster cycle of finding small issues. And actually, the 2 to 3 year plan of developing a new leader on the shop floor, where by the end of that process, they're conscious of all of these little issues that we ran campaigns on and we won on each of them. Yeah, do you know what they all come from? They all come from the attack on trade union power. They all come from this late stage capitalism. They all come from, the unmitigated power of capital to ride roughshod over workers' rights. But you did that through doing it with them, not through just telling them or, read this. Do you know what I mean? Taking people on that journey is the way that you do it. We also have it the other way, by the way, which is, probably most unions don't do enough on the political development, the political education side, political organizing, and then you have probably a smaller number of unions, which would be left the left, like socialist and communist unions, who, in my opinion, often go too heavy too quick. So I mean, sometimes I'll see show me your day one training or or whatever for a group of workers, and it's all about
forever. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like seizing the means of production and so on, and you're like, look. There's about probably 5 to 10% of people who are going to love this. And then the other 85, 90, 95.
We'll run away scared. And...
Yeah. Probably some will run away scared and some will just be like, what the fuck was that? So it's there's a balance to be struck between industrial and workplace organizing, sectoral bargaining, all of that. Then you kick it up, but then also having a political vision of what the country should look like.
Another question I have that kind of mirrors or goes hand in hand with this discussion is media and the role of media and the lack of transnational pro-union or even union-created media, basically more or less in all the countries. I don't know, maybe there are some exceptions where union media is still alive and kicking, but as far as I know, those are the exceptions and not the rule. So the question is what happened there? Because the workers used to have their own media and unions used to have their own media. And now, as I said, more or less everywhere it was dropped for reasons I don't understand. Because when we are talking about education, the public and the workers, well, media is the way to go.
Yeah. And so when you say media, do you mean like newspapers? Like union newspapers or
all of it. I mean, the media landscape today is mega wide and mega bright, and this is media. And well, maybe if you want a question, so with how many trade unionists from different countries have you done an interview like this? No, I assume not with every country yet. No, so this is it. No, the lack of awareness that media is part of the solution.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I would guess that it's cost cutting. I would guess. So if you look back at what so historically, what would the communication look like between let's say, and obviously this undermines what I said earlier, from the union to the workers, but Ben, the workers are the union. Okay, from the union head office, let's say,
the more aware and the less aware. I mean,
yeah, let's say the centralized
way,
union.
no?
Let's say the centralized union.
The professionals, no?
Yeah. Oh, I don't like that.
Well, you are a professional. Deal with it.
I don't know. We'll see. It doesn't sit comfortably with me. But yeah, what would the communication?
So you are an amateur then, no? And if you like it better. Then...
Well, it's funny you should say that because that's one of my favorite words. You know why?
No.
If you want to know about the cynicism of the Brits and of the English language, that in English language we say, like exactly as you just used it, professional is people who you know what they're doing.
The serious one, the adults in the room.
Yeah, amateurs don't know what they're doing. But actually, in French, obviously it's a French word, amateur is like to do something for the love of it. Like it's a much more positive.
Okay.
And us and cynical Brits have gone, you're not even getting paid. Anyway, I digress. So what was it about the communications. So if you look at it historically, I mean, of course, you would have like union newspapers, union newsletters. I actually think one of the biggest problems, and it's kind of a gift and a curse. So you give the example of doing this, which is very easy. You're at your house, I'm at mine. We have a laptop there. It's easy to go. But actually, the ease of using kind of digital tools, actually, I think has had many negative impacts in the communication between workers and the central union. I mean, the most classic one, of course, is, I mean, even being a full-time union, let's say, professional for all of these years, 18 years. I mean, even I think most of my union emails go straight to junk. So I mean, it's not something that you're looking out for. And I remember a few years ago speaking to someone who was talking about how it used to be on the shop floor. So I said, how did it used to be before, when you didn't use emails? Because some unions have even resisted using it till quite recently, particularly in print sectors and so on. And he said, okay, the way that it used to be was that you would take the memo, which is basically what is now the email, and it would go to the printed version would go only to shop stewards, and the shop steward had to make sure that every member put their initial at the top to say that they'd read it. And you're like, how fucking brilliant is that? Like, not just because they're signing it and they've read the memo, but more crucially, that you design your communication so as to mean that the shop steward has to go and have a conversation with every member. That's proper organizing work. Whereas now, in almost all cases, very rare even that unions send the communication only to the shop steward and ask him or her to communicate with his or her members. Actually, usually now, in almost all cases, we just send it directly to the members. We cut out the shop steward. Goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. They're doing it. Why? Because we've got too many gaps in the shop stewards. If we rely on the shop stewards, we don't have the coverage, blah, blah, blah. But then, industrial muscle is like any other muscle. If you never use it, guess what? You lose it. So there's this kind of balance. So I think in terms of the communication, part of it for sure is about the cost cutting. So I think all the stuff that's anything to do with like printed whatever, I think is less.
The question then is, was it? I mean, obviously it wasn't smart to cut this because the media and the communication and the awareness and everything because as it is now when unions are not providing the information, someone else will, and now we have right wingers and far rights in the cahoots because they I can't say they dominate the media landscape, but they are definitely not small. Yeah. And the narratives they come forward with, they can't be dismantled because there is no alternative media landscape that can kind of say, man, this is bullshit. And people just believe it because easily, I mean, this is the easy sell for them. It's very emotional and emotions sell, to explain capitalism and power structures and everything. That's not two sentences. Huh?
No, and also the problem that we have as well is that for me, it's really, really important to distinguish between communication or communicating and broadcasting. Yeah, so effectively what we're talking about there, about trying to give alternative narratives to workers, that's competing on the broadcasting. Yeah. So broadcasting, of course, historically you would say it's TV, radio, and of course now it's increasingly online, etc. But actually, I think that the unique power, the thing that trade unions need to focus on, is the fact that we're not seeking to only broadcast, we're seeking two-way communication. And if I look at I mean, this is an endemic problem, honestly, with so many of the campaigns and the projects that I work on with unions, where effectively unions will say, and they use it. The most common group for this, by the way, is young workers. Young workers are not joining the union anymore. We're sending them all of this great stuff, and they're just not engaging, whatever. Which I always find like a really rather incredible way of approaching trade union organizing. You say, okay, so effectively, what you're saying is that the offer, let's put it in those terms, the union, the organization, the structure that we currently have is the final finished form. It's already been perfected. Why can't these workers see how great the union is? And you go like, well, have you considered going out and asking them like if they don't care about what you've been sending them for however long, has it ever occurred to you to go and ask what they do care about? Because anyone who spends any time with young people, especially young workers these days, will be under no disillusions that they have got lots of shit to say. They're very angry about lots of things, but they don't expect to be. They're not interested in just being broadcast to. It needs to be two-way. Now, lots of unions have, let's take the example of social media. So, we've had some unions, for example, where they'll try to open up the black box of collective bargaining. So, I've seen several union leaders where they'll go in for negotiations, let's say high-level negotiations, and then they'll come out and they'll do like a live broadcast out on, on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, saying, "Oh, this is what just happened. This is the things." Now, a lot of employees don't like that because they've had a nice, cozy relationship very often for a long time. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't be telling your 50,000 members or whatever. Like, no, this is just you and me in a room. Let's discuss it. And you go like, no, 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 I don't work for you. I work for them. So, but doing that is high risk. It can be high risk because, I mean, we've seen cases where, you go out and do that, but then when you open yourself up by broadcasting stuff about the negotiations, when things don't go well, you can have hundreds and thousands of comments under your video from your own members saying, fuck you. Do you know what I mean? So it's because they're not happy what the outcome was. I don't think you will get that if you do what I said earlier, which is you build your campaign from the bottom up. So everybody's what we call in the jargon inoculated. All of the people know what the demands are, they know what the expectations are, they know what they're pushing on, and they know what their role is in terms of trying to deliver on it. So
I'm
it's
thinking about what you are saying, and you are basically saying that people take shortcuts and lifts and helicopters and whatever to get to wherever they want to go, instead of taking the long way and climb the steps and sweat a little bit. Am I right?
There's that, yeah. There's that, but there's also the culture of getting people ending up spending. You have lots of senior people who spend far more time in the presence of employers than they do of members, and that's a problem for me. Do you know what I mean? Like to understand that, to be on the there's a perfect allegory, and I can't take the credit for this. This is my very close friend and former comrade Erkan, who I don't know if you ever met. He used to be with Uni. I used to work with him. He's now back at Unite, and he always uses the metaphor of Antaeus the giant, which is one of the labors of Hercules, one of the ancient Greek stories. And the story vaguely goes like this, and I'm sure I'll get some bits of it wrong. He tells this story much better than I do, so apologies. But basically, in this story, there is this giant called Antaeus, whose mother is Gaia, which is the earth. And he basically challenges people who are passing this bridge or mountain or whatever. He challenges people to fight. And he obviously is a giant, and he kills everybody who he fights. So Hercules observes this, and he realizes that this guy is big, very, very strong, but also can be quite slow. And he notices that when he's fighting with these people, he constantly has to keep touching the ground to restore his energy, because his mother is the earth, and that's how he gets his energy. So what actually happens is that Hercules then goes to fight him, realizes what's going on, The giant tries to touch the ground. Hercules prevents him, holds him in the air, and strangles him and kills him. And effectively, that's what employers are trying to do to union officials. They don't want you touching the ground. Don't go back to the workplace. Don't go back to the work. Stay here. Have a dinner. Have another. Let's meet again. Let's go to a nice, restaurant, hotel. Don't whatever you do. Don't touch the ground. And they strangle you. So that's effectively
cultural kidnapping, basically. So they take them away from wherever the home is, and
it can be a risk. It can be a risk, and it's not always, it's not in intentional or whatever. And actually, obviously, I have probably an non-representative sample in terms of all of the unions who I work with. I mean, in the vast majority of cases, they have sought me out. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I don't see this, but it's something that I hear secondhand reported, because I the unions who I work with want to do it in the right way, but it's something that does happen, and it's easier for that to happen. And it goes back to what I was saying before about the kind of inconvenient truth that when you have good institutional role for the union, we're talking about countries where you have strong sectoral bargaining, it's universally applied to everywhere. Maybe the unions are also involved in the Social Security Administration. It's very easy in those circumstances for the union to become part of the infrastructure almost of the state, and certainly of the status quo, if not the actual the arms of the state. And we just need to be conscious of that. I'm not saying, like I said before, I still think sectoral collective bargaining is the best thing that unions can win. I still want unions to have strong institutional roles, but we also do need to recognize the risk of that role, which is what is it that you don't necessarily want the poacher to always be eating with the gamekeeper, let's say.
Question, and now about the future, not about the present or the past, because basically, I mean, maybe I'm naive, but from my perspective, you describe well what is going on, why we are where we are, and the question is where to go from here. And the question is, what is the mood today, what you see? Because, the decline was for 30, 40 years, steady decline. The situation is so dire as it wasn't from 19th century or whatever, yeah? So actually, I have made data last week about the history of inequality in Western Europe from Middle Ages, from 12th century, and it was more or less steady for 500 years, and in 18th, 19th century, it started to decline, and now, since neoliberalism, after 150 years of decline, the inequality is again going up. So 150 years of doing the right thing, and now for 40 years doing the wrong thing. As stupidity goes, or blindness, or denial, or whatever, you can't deny reality for too long because it's just screaming in your face. So and that's the question, I would guess that the situation is so bad that people are kind of waking up, or not. Tell me, or tell us.
When you say people, do you mean like workers?
I mean workers, no?
Yeah. I think workers. I mean, one of the things
like the wages are stagnating, the prices are just through the roof, the situation in workplaces, layoffs, whatever, AI, you name it. It's screaming that this isn't working for me as a normal worker. So, they should be flooding the union now, and that's the question,
Yeah. So
is it happening? Will it happen? What to do? How to do it? No,
it won't happen.
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, let's finish. We can cut it off. We'll finish there. See that? No. No, they won't automatically, is what I mean. So basically, and I'm sure you will have seen it. You always see these kind of figures bandied around about, if you ask, like, if sociologists or social scientists ask young people, like, either directly, do you support unions, or just the features of a union, do you think collective bargaining should be the way that wages are determined, etc., etc. I mean, it always comes back with the same thing, which is young people are really, really pro-union, as like, well, show me the membership list that confirms that. Yeah, so there clearly is a problem there. Of course, the old truism that that we always use in organizing is you probably know the answer. What's the number one reason that workers give for not joining a union?
They don't want to pay the membership fee.
No,
I don't know.
Even more basic.
They are scared.
Nobody asked.
Ah, okay.
No, that's usually the giving back as the number one answer, and that's a fact. It's a fact. I mean, and I've seen it even with lots of the campaigns that I've worked on. That in lots of unions, so obviously we have the staff people and the organizers and so on, but then also
now nobody asked physically.
Like nobody has asked me to join. Yeah. No one has asked me to join.
Physically, face to face, or virtually, because that's a different kind of beast.
You mean like on a video, or you mean like
like
having a live website?
Someone did send me an email, or someone did send me a message, or it wasn't physical. It wasn't like, okay, even this isn't physical, but at least I've seen that someone came to me and touched me, or no, touching is
steady on.
But
trade union movements had enough of that.
Or it can be virtual, and even that isn't happening because.
Yeah, look, it could be a video, could be, I found that actually the distinction between video and in person is not that different. I don't mean just a generic email from head office that went to dear all workers. Yeah, I wouldn't count that. But okay. I mean just hasn't been asked. I mean, and that's true. I mean, if you look at the level, certainly the level of density in most of Europe, then you add to that the very low level of coverage for shop stewards and so on. And then you add to that so many of the shop stewards that currently are in position that might not even think that it is their job to go and ask new people to join the union. I can easily see how the vast majority of people. Then when you talk about young workers and so on, they are mostly working in our lowest density sectors, anyway, which, we can come back to. But no, I think that if you talk about the actual issues, if you talk about the underlying problems, of course, it's only going to get worse and worse. But it's certainly not the case that people will automatically go, I need a union. I think that very often people will just get angry and angry. And unless, this is why I'm saying that when we go back to the communication issue, I don't want to necessarily see unions investing loads of money on social media teams and communications and so that we can compete with the far right narratives. We are never going to have the resources to outcompete the dark forces that are trying to do that. So why, you should always shift the terrain to a place where we're good and we have the advantage and you have the disadvantage. Where's that? In actual speaking to people on the shop floor, speaking to each other that they don't have. So that's why we need to move our resources and our strategy in terms of encouraging those conversations. But it's not something that is necessarily been done in the past, and it's also very difficult to. I can think of many times with unions that I've worked with over the years where you will even run a pilot. So we do a training, we get together all of the officials, we do a training with leaders, we do with the organizers, then we go into the shop floor level, we do a 1 or 2 day training with the actual workplace leaders, and then they go out and they carry out a campaign which they have decided. We don't tell them to do it. We just provide a framework. We have a structured series of discussions where the conclusion is that the shop stewards themselves have the pen in their hand and they commit to each other what they're going to go and do in their company this week, this month, this year. And they're far more likely to go and do it when they've committed to each other, not because they got an email from head office. Do you know what I mean? So you get them, to go and do that. But the culture issue is still really, really profound because we've got so many cases where we've run, do all of those trainings, go out and have fantastic results, new collective bargaining agreement, 100 new members, loads of new activists, whatever it may be. And then you take that and you consider that within union and say, look, imagine if we did that in every workplace. And it's like, yeah, just leave it with us. Yeah. And it's very easy to drift back to the old way, of doing things, unless there's people there to kind of push it every day. It's not the job of the whole purpose, I think, of people like me and people who, much more important people who are doing it within their own unions is not necessarily to tell people something that they don't already know, but to be there to continue to apply pressure after it would be quite easy to slip back into old ways. And I don't mean to be so self-aggrandizing here, but like kind of be the conscience of pushing people, and also, you know, the real benefit that I have, and that me and the people I work with have, is that when we go to work with a union, we can be the bad cop. Do you know what I mean? We can, obviously not too bad. We want them to still affiliate, but you know, we can be more provocative. We can push in a way that it's just, you just can't do when you're inside an organization. I always make this joke with a lot of the unions I work with, where, you know, I can go and work with your leadership and say, "Oh, that's a great idea, Ben. Oh, wow, Ben knows stuff about organizing." You think when I go back to the internal meetings of my own organization, people say that? No, because that's not about my organization. That's just how organizations are. You know, I can go and say something to either either the shop stewards, the leaders, whatever of a union, and how many times I've had those conversations, and I'm like, yeah, and then afterwards, the head of organizing of that union goes, "What the fuck? I've been telling them that for the last 10 years." And you go, "Yeah, sometimes it's just good to have someone else come and say the same thing." You know, that's so in terms of the future, I think that I don't want to be when you think that I'm negative here. I think there are lots of unions who are doing good stuff, and I think there's lots of unions who will do well. But I think there's also lots of unions and union organizations, because let's include like the internationals and so on in that need to do a hell of a lot more. And I think that are quite thinking that, you know, someone else will fix this, you know. And you see that, you know, from the fall of affiliation that we have from affiliates, you know, to using external funding and so on, and you know, the amount of our resources that come from actually unions wanting to affiliate to us is lower than it used to be, and is likely to continue. So that there are, and we see that replicated in national unions. But I don't think, and you know, and I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush here, because we've got some fantastic union leaders who know this and are doing everything they can to change course, but lots are not, if we're honest, you know. So we have a kind of mixed picture, I would say.
No, maybe a generational exchange needs to happen, and new blood, and God knows, because you know, as I said, the situation is so dire that it can't be hidden for too long from the eyes and consciousness of working people what's going on. Anyway, so we wanted to do it for 1 hour. So here we are at 1 hour mark. So Ben, thank you very much. And I could talk with you for hours, but we only had this one. So let's end it here, and maybe in a few months or in a year or wherever, we can talk again about, well, what happened and how is the situation, because maybe it will improve. Who knows? Yeah. Maybe you are too negative.
Yeah, maybe I'll be more positive. Maybe I'll mellow in my old age. I hope so.